Hi, I'm Ben Welsh and I'm coming to you from the LA Times newsroom. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to install the pandas data analysis toolkit for Python inside a virtual env on the Mac OS X operating system. And then I'm going to show you how to get started using it inside of a Jupyter notebook. Now this video is part of a series that I'm doing online called First Python Notebook. And you should have at this point have already installed the Jupyter Notebook inside a virtual environment before you begin this video. So if you haven't done that, you're going to need to go back and go through those previous videos and make sure you have that stuff set up. Now where we last left off in this class, you had a Jupyter Notebook up in your browser that you'd started up from your terminal. If that's where you are currently, I need you to go back to your terminal and hit the Control-C command and then type in Y to kill your Jupyter Notebook and return back to your terminal. Now if you're just restarting your computer and you have everything installed, you're going to need to navigate with your terminal to your First Python Notebook repository and then activate your virtual environment, which is exactly what I've done here and you can see on the screen in my terminal. Alright, in our previous videos we've gone back through these steps a few times just to get some practice, but from here on out I'm going to assume that you've already got that stuff handled and you're going to take care of it before the video begins. Alright, so if you're not familiar with how to get back to those steps, you should refer to the previous lessons and catch up. Alright, but just to repeat, I have a terminal open here on my Mac laptop. I've navigated into my code directory and then into my First Python Notebook directory, and I've activated my virtual environment. And if I'd had my Jupyter Notebook open, I would need to kill it so that I can return to the terminal where you see I am right now. Alright, now we're going to return to another tool we've used previously called pip. As you remember, pip is Python's tool for installing other third-party tools. We used it in the last video to install the Jupyter Notebook. Here, we're going to use it to install pandas. Pandas is a popular open source library for analyzing data in Python. It was initially developed at a financial management firm to do Wall Street style data analysis, but in the years since it's been adopted by people all around the world to do science and media and all sorts of other things using the fundamental tools it provides. But it's not a tool that comes prepackaged with Python. We need to use pip to install it. So in the same way we install Jupyter Notebook, we're going to type into the terminal pip space install space pandas, just like the animal except with an S. Pip space install space pandas. I'm going to do that and press enter. And now my computer is going to go to the internet and it's going to download the latest version of pandas and it's going to install that inside my virtual environment. And it's going to install more than pandas. It's going to install a couple other libraries that it needs to do its work. One of the important ones is called NumPy. You don't need to know a lot about it, but NumPy was an older Python library for analyzing data that pandas has in some ways sort of superseded. And so deep inside of pandas is a lot of the old NumPy tools that people in Python have used for a lot of years. And so if you've ever run into NumPy before, you'll actually be seeing pieces of it again here as you work with pandas. You can see that my installation is completed. It says at the bottom, successfully installed. That's good news for me. I hope you get the same message. Now, if you don't, you're going to need to do some research to figure out what's wrong. There's some underlying dependencies that needed to be installed for this to work. And one of them that was very important is a code compiler. And so if you didn't do the code compiler step, say to install Xcode here on the Apple computer, you can probably expect to have an error. And there was a similar compiler on Windows that needed to be installed as well. So if you have that problem right here, you're going to want to go back to those instructions that we wrote and make sure that you have the Windows Code Compiler or Xcode for Mac OS X installed. But if you see what I see, you're in pretty good shape. Alright, and so our next step, now that pandas is installed, is to boot up our Jupyter Notebook again and to import pandas into that environment and to play around with it a little bit to get started. Now, as I hope you'll remember, to start your Jupyter Notebook, you type into your terminal Jupyter with a Y, Jupyter, space notebook. Then, pressing enter, my terminal will be taken over by a server that's running on my computer, which will host the Jupyter Notebook just for me in my web browser, which then pumps up. And again, when this is running in the terminal, you're unable to type any traditional terminal commands. And if you want to go back to the terminal to install things with pip or to do whatever else, you'll need to hit Control-C to quit out. But as long as it's running, you'll have a notebook server up in your browser that you can write code with. Okay? And we can see here in the file browser is the notebook that I first developed in the last lesson. It's called My First Notebook. You should open that now. Here it is in a new tab. You can see the simple math that we were doing in the previous lesson is still here and saved and available. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to add some new cells to our notebook at the top of the browser. Previously we just saw how pressing the play button would add a new cell at the bottom. But there's other ways to add cells as well. Here in the toolbar you can see a plus button. This plus button will insert a new cell below the cell where you currently are. You can see I had selected the first cell and hit the plus button, so it made a new empty cell here in the second position. To remove a cell, you can click on it, as I do here, and hit the cut button, which will cut the cell into your clipboard. You could copy or paste it someplace else if you preferred, but cut is also a nice way to quickly delete a cell. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the first cell by putting my mouse here and clicking, and then I'm just going to hit cut a series of times until it deletes all of the cells of my notebook, and I'm back where I started. You should take a moment to do the same. Once you've done that, we're ready to introduce pandas into the notebook and start to mess around with it. Now when you have a third-party Python library that isn't part of the standard tools available in Python, you have to import it into your script for it to be available. And that's done with a simple command called import. So I'd like you now to click into that first cell and type simply import, one word, space, pandas, which again was the name of the library we installed with pip. Now I do import pandas and I hit the play button and it runs and nothing happens. Again, that's a good sign. It's usually a good sign in computer programming when nothing happens. That means everything ran as it was expected and there were no errors. If you hit the play button and the same thing happens, you're in good shape. Pandas is installed. You are ready to use it. You don't have to worry anymore about any of the many dependencies and difficult Python things you need to get on your computer to start working. Congratulations, you've made it. Now, if yours does not import and you see an error being spit into your notebook, that means you probably have one of these installation errors that I discussed before. And you're going to need to take that error message, maybe the very tail end of it, and Google it and see if anyone has any advice. Or again, go back to the prerequisites section of this class and check to see that you have everything properly installed. All right, now let's begin using it. One thing that I'd like to do before we begin in pandas is to change our import statement slightly. If you click above to import pandas and you add a space and then the word as and then a space and the word PD and then rerun that cell, that's going to take that pandas variable that's imported into your environment here in your code, and it's going to give it a shortcut name. It's going to give it a little alias of PD. And so that when you're using pandas, you don't have to type out pandas every single time. You can simply type PD and then whatever else you'd like to do with pandas, and you'll be able to write less code. Now, I personally don't care either way. I wouldn't mind writing a few extra characters, but the reason I'm asking you to do this is because almost all of the panda examples and code you're going to see on the web is going to begin by importing pandas with this same shortcut. It's in some ways kind of a tradition or a custom of people who write pandas code, and you'll see it all over the internet every time you Google pandas or you read notebooks by journalists, academics, and others. And so it's just kind of a good habit to get in right away so that your code is familiar to others as well. And so we're simply importing pandas, but we're renaming it when we import it as the shorter PD namespace. So if in my next cell I simply type in PD and press run, you can see that it spit out this module. And this doesn't really mean anything, but it's just to show that that variable PD is now your way to access hundreds or dozens of different methods, a sort of mountain of computer code that is buried within this directory inside your virtual environment that we installed with pip. And by typing PD period and then the tab key, we see the autocomplete option of IPython Notebook, which will show all of the many different options that are available within pandas to read in data, manipulate databases, filter and aggregate information, and to make data analysis really easy. And this is really only the tip of the iceberg. Again, you type PD period and then tab, which is an autocomplete feature given to you by the notebook, and you can get just a taste of what some of those things are. All right, we'll be using many of them as we go on. And if you Google any one of them online, you can find a lot of information about all those individual methods. Why don't we try something very simple using one of them? So let's start off by creating something in Python we haven't done before, which is a list. A list in Python is just a set of numbers, characters, or mixed characters and numbers, or all sorts of things that you can then package together in one list, in one item, and then they can be looped through, they can be manipulated as a set, and you can do a lot of different things with them once they're organized in a sequential way. And we're going to make our first list, and we're going to call it my underscore list, will be the name of our variable. And then to set the variable, we do the equal sign. So we're going to say our list equals, and then I'm going to do a flat bracket, which is sort of like a parenthesis, but it's flat on the side. It should be above your enter key. And I'm going to make a very simple list of data that we're going to do some basic data analysis on. This is not for a news story or anything complicated, though we're going to get there soon. It's really just a very simple list of numbers to show off some of the techniques of pandas. So in my list, I'm going to do all of the even numbers between 0 and 10. So I'm going to do 2, and then a comma to separate the items and create a list, and then 4, and then comma, 6, comma, 8. So I'm creating a variable called myList. I know it's a list because I have flat brackets is what it's being set as. And then inside those flat brackets, I'm including the numbers that I would like to be part of my list. 2, 4, 6, and 8. So now if I hit the play button, again, nothing happens. That list has now been set inside this variable, which we could do more with. Now, if you're an experienced Python programmer and you're good at this kind of thing, you could immediately think of all kinds of different ways you could manipulate this list to loop through it, to aggregate it, to figure out how to calculate statistics on your own just by using the base tools of Python. But you'd have to know how to program in Python. One of the great things about pandas is that just by learning an itty-bitty bit of Python, you can feed your data into it and then be able to quickly filter it, aggregate it, rank it, sort it, do all kinds of statistical stuff without having to get very good at the fundamentals of Python itself, which is great for beginners and also just less code to write for experienced people. And that's part of the reason why pandas is really so popular. So now I'm going to show you how to take that very simple list, hand it off to pandas, and let pandas start to do some pretty cool stuff with it without a lot of effort. So the way we're going to do that, and this is a technique you'll see again and again in pandas, is we're going to take this structured data from our list, or say from a spreadsheet, or a database, or some other data source, and we're going to feed it into pandas. And then after pandas has sort of gobbled it up and ingested it into its system, we're going to use all those many things that came after the period, all those dozens of pandas tricks to make things happen. So in the case of a simple list, that just means converting your data into what pandas calls a series. Okay? And to do that, I'm going to make a new variable, and I'm going to call it my underscore series. And I'm going to do equal. And then again, I'm going to type PD, which is my shortcut to access pandas, period. And then the word series with the capital S, which is pandas' way of representing a list. So PD.series, and then I'm going to open a parenthesis, and I'm going to pass in my list as input to create a new pandas series that's based on my list. And so I'm going to type my underscore list between those two parentheses. So again, we're going to take that list we created on the previous line, we're going to feed it into a pandas series, and then we're going to save that as a variable called myList. So I'm going to do that and hit the play button, and nothing happens. That's again a good sign. Now if you get an error here, it's probably due to like a small typo. Are you sure you put the underscores in? Are you sure that myList was named consistently between those two lines? Are you sure that you did a capital S on the series and there's no spaces between PD, period, and series? All those little things in computer programming have to be exactly right for things to run. And if you just have a little typo or a small mistake, there's going to be a big scary error message. So for instance, if I went back up to this line and I added a space there and I hit the play button, oh, it still works, which shows you how flexible Python is. But let's say I made a typo and I called it mylist2 instead of mylist. And this is a variable which does not exist, all right? And I hit the play button. It now throws an error, and it says mylist2 is not defined. Do not freak out if this kind of thing happens. It's totally normal. It's part of being a computer programmer. And really the only way out of it is to carefully study the error and try to figure out what Python's trying to tell you, and then to carefully study your code to correct the error. And even though this looks kind of techie and weird, it's really a pretty simple message at the end. It's telling you mylist2 is not defined, which if you think about it makes sense. This variable mylist2 does not exist in the page, and so it can't be handed off into the series. But mylist does, so simply correct that typo, press play, and then it'll work. All right? So now that our data is in the series, we can do some really cool stuff with it just because pandas has a lot of handy tricks. We can say take my_series, do a period, which again is our way to get into pandas' many cool tools. I could hit tab and I could begin to see what a lot of these cool tools are. But I know the ones I want to try. There's one that's called sum. So if I do mySeries dot sum and then open parenthesis, close parenthesis, that is going to execute the sum method on our series, which guess what is going to add up all the values. So 2 plus 4 is 6, plus 6 is 12, plus 8 is 20. And so with just that one quick line of code, we've output the sum of our series. And there's many, many more like this we could use. I could do mySeries.max parenthesis, open and close parenthesis, hit play, we get the maximum value. Follow along with me as I do these here. Here's a third, my_series. How about min for minimum? I do that, I hit play, and there it is. And I wasn't born knowing what all these little handy methods were. I just gradually learned them by reading other people's pandas code, reading the documentation for how a series works. If you just Googled panda and series, you'd land on a really long page which has dozens and dozens of different methods which you might decide to use depending on what you're trying to do. And then also, our tab autocomplete gives us kind of a window into a lot of them too. Let's see if I wanted an average, the numbers. Is average in this list if I scroll up and down it? I can see that it isn't. There's no average. But hey, sometimes people call the average the mean, right? Let's look if that's there. And there it is. I can see in here there's a mean, a median, and a mode, which are basic statistics I bet you've learned at some point. So I just click on mean, run, add the 2 parentheses, run it. We then get the average of our values, 5. I could do the same thing. We could get mode, which doesn't really return anything too much because there's only one of each number. How about we try median? We get our median. And there's more and more of these. You could just keep going. There happens to be one for standard deviation I just happen to know. And then there's also a really cool one called describe, which will package all sorts of different information, including some of what we published above, about the distribution of the series. And so just by doing describe, mySeries.describe, open close parenthesis, I get the count of how many values are in the set, 4. I get the average, the standard deviation, the minimum, the different percentile values of the distribution, and the maximum. Now, what's really cool, again about pandas and the Jupyter Notebook together, is I could go right back up to the top of my script, and I could change this to 1, 3, 7, 9, which are the odd numbers between 0 and 10. I could go to the cell pull down and click Run All, and now all of those numbers and all of those stats that we generated before have been regenerated for our new list, right? And it's that simple to apply the exact same methods to a totally different data set. And if instead of my list, we were reading in a massive spreadsheet of 100 million records, or tapping a database via a web connection, or however else you imported data, all the pandas methods would work exactly the same and be just as simple. And that's a big reason why this system is so popular. All right, and in our next lesson, we're going to do exactly that. But if you've gotten this far, congratulations, you've installed the Pandas Data Analysis Library, and you've done your first basic data analysis inside of a Jupyter Notebook. Before you quit, go ahead and hit the Save button, And then remember, if you go back to your terminal and you hit Control-C and then the letter Y and enter, you'll be able to close down your Jupyter Notebook and be right back where you started on your terminal.